Good morning. If you don't know me, my name's Elliot. Welcome to the Cove. A few months ago, I ran the terrain race with my wife. It's an obstacle course race. We were climbing over walls, flipping tires, climbing ropes, all kinds of fun things. You see, if you're going to get me to run, you're going to have to sweeten the deal. There better be some fun stuff along the way because there aren't many things I hate more than running. I told my life group recently that if you see me running, it's because I'm out of bullets. But I've been on this weight loss journey. I'm down 45 pounds from where I started, and along the way, there have been ups and downs. But one of the most frustrating parts are the plateaus. I would get stuck somewhere and just not be able to break through. Now, I've got a strong will, but this has been hard work. There have been days when I don't want to keep going, especially when I'm not seeing the results that I want to see. So I needed something to keep me motivated to keep getting up and showing up at the gym day after day. I needed to know that there was a purpose behind all the pain I was putting myself through. Having this race on the horizon kept me motivated to keep getting after it day after day. After all, I couldn't look bad in front of my wife. We all need motivation. We need to know that there's a purpose and that what we're doing isn't pointless. So many times we wander aimlessly through life and we're unfulfilled. We feel like we're stuck on a treadmill or a stationary bike. We're out of breath, but we haven't really gone anywhere. Now, some of us would give anything to be on a treadmill right now, but we can't go to the gym. We feel like we've been trapped in our houses for months now, and it's starting to wear on us. Sure, staying at home sounded good for the first few days, but as John Acuff says, sometimes flannel feels like failure. And we feel a lot of things right now, but fulfilled probably isn't on the list. If we're honest with ourselves, that wasn't true before either. But, we've been at the same job for a long time. It was all right. It paid the bills, but that's about it. We dreaded getting up every morning, and we were living for the weekend. We did what we had to do, but we weren't fulfilled. We've been in that relationship for a long time too, haven't we? We knew it wasn't going anywhere, but we stayed in it because we were scared to be alone. It's not what we want, but it's better than nothing, right? Right? But what if there's a better way? What if the reason we aren't fulfilled is because the things we're pursuing aren't tied to our purpose? Did you know that Jesus outlined our purpose in the Sermon on the Mount? Now, some of us have been looking for our purpose in life for our entire lives, and Jesus has already laid it out for us. Jesus had just finished talking through the Beatitudes. These are the characteristics of the followers of Jesus, members of the kingdom, and Jesus describes them at the beginning of Matthew 5. But in verse 13, Jesus makes a shift. Here's what he says. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the salt of the earth. What's he driving at here? Jesus is transitioning from characteristics to calling, and he's saying that his followers will be poor in spirit, merciful, and all the rest of the Beatitudes so that they can be the salt of the earth. We're now talking about how we are to live our lives in light of the Beatitudes. Since we're members of the kingdom, since the Beatitudes define our lives, since we're actively following Jesus, Jesus tells us who we are. Now, there's tremendous power in telling someone who they are. Why? Because who we are determines what we'll do with our lives. So many times we get that twisted. We think that it's what we do that defines us, but in reality, what we do flows from who we are. The problem is, many of us don't know who we are, or we've forgotten. Now, this is a theme in the Bible. You remember Gideon? He was one of the judges in the Old Testament. The people of Israel had strayed from God and were being brutally oppressed by the nation of Midian. When things got bad enough, they began to cry out to God. Sounds familiar, right? Turns out we haven't actually changed all that much over the centuries. God heard their cry and chose Gideon to deliver them. But the story has a strange start. Here's what happened in Judges 6, beginning in verse 11. It says, the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. Now, just to be clear here, Gideon is hiding out of fear. Normally, when you were threshing wheat, you would do it in a large open space. You would throw the wheat into the air and let the wind blow the chaff away, and then you would be left with what you needed when it fell to the ground. Now, a wine press, on the other hand, was dug into the ground. It was an enclosed space, not ideal at all for threshing wheat. He was doing this because he was afraid, and when we're afraid, we do things the wrong way. Maybe you've seen this happening lately. There are a lot of fears floating around these days. But we continue the story. It says, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon said, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family." Now, have you ever argued with God about who you are? Gideon seems to be pretty self-aware here. He is, in fact, hiding from the Midianites, but when the angel of the Lord appears, he calls Gideon mighty warrior, then tells him that he will be the one to lead Israel in their defeat of Midian. If you've never read the story of Gideon, before you go to bed tonight, check out Judges 6 and 7. I promise you'll enjoy it. To make a long story short, Gideon, after some more arguing with God about who he is, ends up leading Israel to victory over Midian with an army of only 300 men. God used Gideon even when Gideon didn't think he was worthy. As it turns out, the one who created you knows exactly who you are, even when you don't see it. And the same is true for you. Jesus wants to tell you who you are, and he's taking the guesswork out of it here. Did you notice Jesus didn't say, "You should be the salt of the earth"? He didn't say, "You could be the salt of the earth." He didn't even say, "You will become the salt of the earth." He said, "You are the salt of the earth." He's telling you who you are and expects you to live accordingly. He can tell you who you are because he made you, and he knows exactly who you are even when you don't see it. So what did he mean? Sometimes we take salt for granted. We put it in those little containers on the table and don't really give it a second thought. It's common in our world. But just because something is common doesn't mean it's not vital. Did you know the Greeks thought salt was divine? It was connected with purity. It comes from the sea, and it was used in sacrifices to make them pure. Now, as a Christian, it's the purity of your life that causes you to stand out amongst the crowd. People are drawn to God because they see something different in you. Purity, not just sexual purity, but purity in heart. Blessed are the pure in heart. Purity in speech, and purity in how we live our day-to-day lives. But salt isn't just pure, it adds flavor. Christians were not meant to be boring. They were meant to infuse flavor, life, and joy into the world around them. One time, Robert Louis Stevenson said, "I have been to church today, and I am not depressed." He was shocked enough to write that down. This should not be. The people around you should see the joy that radiates from you because of what Jesus is doing in your life. We were meant to spread that joy to the world. The salt also preserves. Before refrigeration, one of salt's primary purposes was to keep meat from going bad. Now, in the same way, Christians are meant to keep each other on track and keep the world from going completely off the rails. When Jesus calls you the salt of the earth, he has some specific things in mind. He's giving you purpose and direction. He expects you to fulfill that purpose. Why? Because he loves you and he loves the world. A few minutes ago, we said that so many of us wander around aimlessly. We're lost in a fog and we can't seem to get traction in our lives. But what if that's because our pursuits are disconnected from our purpose? I want to suggest to you that when you align your pursuits and your purpose, you experience the peace and freedom of God. That fulfillment that you're looking for is within your grasp. Jesus has already told you how to find it. Ironically, it has nothing to do with your job, your relationship status, or how many kids you have. As usual, our culture isn't even close to hitting the target here, which is why even when you achieve the things that are supposed to make you successful, you still feel empty. You have a purpose. You don't need to discover it. Jesus has already laid it out for you. He's called you the salt of the earth, and Christian, he expects you to fulfill that purpose. But the key here is intentionality. You can't accidentally live a pure life. You don't stumble into bringing the joy of Jesus to those around you. You don't mistakenly help other people take their next step of faith. If you want to live your purpose, you're going to have to do it on purpose. I do need to tell you, though, that this verse ends in a warning. Did you see it? Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men." If you, as a Christian, choose not to step into this calling, this purpose that's been set before you by Jesus, Jesus essentially says that you're worthless. Now, I didn't say it, so don't be mad at me. Jesus said salt that loses its saltiness isn't good for anything. Now, ironically, scientifically speaking, it isn't even possible for salt to lose its saltiness. Jesus is pointing out how ridiculous it would be for one of his followers to reject this calling. Now, you can choose not to step into your calling. You can choose not to follow Jesus. What Jesus is saying is this: those who follow me are the salt of the earth, and everything that implies. He's saying that because you've chosen to follow him, your life will be characterized by the Beatitudes. As a result, you will be blessed. But beyond the blessing, there's a calling on your life that you are expected to fulfill. Because you are a follower, you are the salt of the earth. So church, we got a job to do. We, that includes you, are to live lives of purity, bring joy to those around us, and help others take their next step of faith. We like the blessing that comes from the Beatitudes, but now we've been given a responsibility to go along with the blessing. It's time to step into our calling. And in the midst of our calling, we'll find fulfillment. See, when you align your purpose and your pursuits, you experience peace and freedom. Jesus did not make a mistake when he called you the salt of the earth. He knows exactly who you are. He made you. You might not see it yet, but he's going to use you in a big way, and we're here to help. Now, maybe you're with us today for the very first time. I just want to welcome you. If you need to talk with somebody about what it means to become a Christian, to become the salt of the earth, we've got people in the chat right now who would love to speak with you. You can shoot us a direct message or email us at hello@swisscovechristian.com. We're here for you. You aren't alone. If you've been a Christian for a while and you're ready to step into your calling, just type "I'm in the comments right now. This virus did not cancel your calling. We're still in this together. We've still got a job to do. Love you all.